All right, we should be live. Well, good morning. Good morning to everyone out there, and good morning to my very special guest. How's everyone doing? How are you doing, Medico?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, it's good, almost a good evening from my side, right? That's
Yes,
always the fun fact.
yes, yeah. I always feel like when I say like good morning, or like whatever I say, good evening, especially on like Discord, I'm like, this is like good morning, good afternoon, good night. I don't know which one,
Should
depending
have
on
a universal, like, yeah.
yeah, good day, I guess maybe. Anyways, yep. Before we get too deep, I guess I'm just curious. Did you pay any attention to Snowflake and what was going on, like what they launched and things of that nature? That I don't know.
I
You were
look at
interested?
the, yeah, I look at briefly because I had a rough week last week, but yeah, I think it was interesting. I looked it up at the conference, but it was pretty expensive, right? Um, I
Yeah.
think it's a bit, that's a bit the downside. But what's your hot takes? Like,
I don't know if I have any specific hot takes. I was just super exhausted. I was just
yeah,
like,
yeah,
this is way too much socializing and people. And I don't know if it was Snowflake itself or just Vegas because there's just so many people out at all, like not at all
yeah.
times. If you want peaceful, just go out between like 7 and 12 in the afternoon and no one's around. But there's just a certain point that everyone's around. So, yeah.
Yeah. But I think it was. Did you do any in-person conference before that one? Because for me, it has been like really a while since.
I had done one other in-person conference, but that one was smaller, and yeah, it was in Austin, which is still a little bit of a not party city, but a little more lively. But it was still just much more. It was just tamer. So yeah, that's kind of my feelings
I
there.
think for me, that's what is exhausting, right? We are not used it to do it anymore. So much people to talk at the same time
Yeah.
without the capabilities to mute them.
Yes, there was a party. I felt so bad, like I couldn't hear like anyone. It was just like in a suite, and I felt really bad because I was like trying really hard to like, what are they saying? I can kind
Yeah.
of make out most of what they're saying, but I'm having to try to mute out like 30 other conversations right now, and this is just not happening. So well, now I just want to kind of give a quick icebreaker, but I guess why don't you give everyone kind of a quick background on kind of who you are, what you're doing. I mean, some people may have seen your content, but just in case they haven't, I'd love to kind of get some of your background.
Yeah, sure. So I've been doing now data engineering for the past 8 years. I started like really early on the on-premise cluster, get the opportunity to work like on Spark 1.3, which seems like so far away from them, and even write MapReduce Hadoop jobs. So really in the early days of like distributed computing, and I basically surfed on that wave, jumped to the cloud, um, and so on. Work mostly from corporate to like the past 3-4 years on tech company. So I'm initially from Brussels, Belgium, and I moved to Berlin in Germany like 3 years back. And I started to do content creation like about, I would say, 1.5 years ago with my blog. I was reading someone which was called, you may know him, Seattle Data Guy. He was writing also about data engineering stuff, and I was like, "Whoa, there is someone else really that care about data engineering out there." Yeah, so I started like slowly on the blog, and since December on the YouTube channel, and try to be a bit more active. And like, yeah, the past weeks there was a lot of things going on. The website I launched with the Data Creators Club, which is basically just a website to search content creator around data. You can filter through different channels, YouTube, Medium, and also specific topics. Got a lot of feedbacks from that. So yeah, uh, really nice things going on. That's about it.
Yeah, that's about it. It's just a few things. No, I mean you're kind of busy everywhere, and I'm sure you have work. So your videos are definitely also take a lot more time. Whenever I see your videos, it's like it's a lot more effort. And I know editing is also something you enjoy. So I know you take on almost all of that. Because you enjoy it. So, and then I think you kind of you didn't really answer, I guess, how you got into data. You just kind of started in the fact that you're into data. Like, how did you kind of get into it? I guess out of college.
No, but to be honest, like back then was just like open bar. Like, no, on a serious note, that I started like from business intelligence. Like I was doing like, SSIS Microsoft Suite back then, like click thing to do pipeline. We didn't really talked about really the term data engineering or data pipeline. It was just moving data for report. And I got the opportunity to do an internship on a big data project, which was like yeah, really early back then. And I just jumped on that opportunity. And after that, like it was a 3-4 months project. Every company was started to invest into on-premise big data cluster with like Cloudera and Hortonworks. Probably doesn't tell a lot of new grads that's starting right now, but this was back then like the two big player in big
Yeah,
data. And yeah, like if you had like back then some experience, like even a little, because there was no, I mean, you have to put also into context that in terms of online knowledge, it was really, really small. Like there
yeah,
was nothing that at all. I mean, apart like from the Scala course on Coursera, I think, which was very good reference. But like, yeah, regarding big data and so on, it was basically you're learning on the job. So company hiring you at back then, if you had experience like anything, because you couldn't set up something easily for a side project like you can do nowadays,
yeah,
basically you look like an alien. It's like, oh, this guy wrote some lines of code, even if it's like 10 or 12 lines of code, and understand like the basic principle. Yeah. So yeah, you had like way far more, I would say, leverage and easy to enter the market as it is today. So like that's like basically my journey. I feel like I was in the bubble early and then like just upskills myself along the way through jobs.
yeah. Yeah, I remember like the Hortonworks and Cloudera days. Like it, it almost made me think of like I was thinking about it at the Snowflake Summit. I was like, man, like 7 years ago, this was basically like yeah, like Cloudera or Hortonworks throwing a conference, and then like all the tools around it, like being like, oh, here's all the other layers we built, or not necessarily Hortonworks or Cloudera, more like Hadoop itself, but like, and then everyone built tools around it, and like, okay, how do we whatever. And then I was like, will we be in the same place 7 years from now where everyone's like talking about a completely different tool? And we're all just like, oh yeah, I remember the Snowflake days. I was like, I hope
Yeah,
not.
it seems like it's 20 years ago, but it's less than a decade. That's what it's really impressive, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It really was. I mean, like, I think when you look at it from like how long it really was around, I think it was more than a decade because I think it was like
Yeah,
Yahoo
it's
and
when it started. Yeah,
but like when it really became applicable to a lot of other businesses was like yeah, I mean, it was really just a decade ago, if not less, when businesses that were not big tech were starting to use it. So
yeah,
yeah, it's just funny, and obviously it's still used, I think, heavily. It's just often in very different situations. I mean, Cloudera is still a company. It's private, but it's still a company. It's still around somewhere. So
that's maybe like a tip if you want to know how old the data stack is. If you heard like any Hortonworks or Cloudera within their stack, then yeah, they've been there since quite a while.
yeah, yeah. But nothing wrong with that. I mean, people are still technically on a lot of old stacks. SSA, like you said, SSAS, that's still around. I hear people using SSAS, and I'm like, oh, still here, huh? Just not going anywhere. Doesn't
Yeah.
never goes away. Okay. So I guess with that, like you brought up like how for you it was easier back then. How do you recommend people kind of get data jobs, their first data jobs today? Then, if you feel like it's harder.
Yeah, I mean, given like also the economic context, it's definitely harder. I think you to stand out. Uh, but I would put like more in a positive note. Like I just mentioned that there was no resource back then. Like you are on your own, and I really feel like I had like a lot of failure projects because everybody was learning. Right? Imagine you need to set up a cluster and premise cluster, and like the only people that can help is like basically the vendors, and you
Yeah.
cannot find anything online like article or at least like not at the same quantity and level that we have today, right? Um, so I would say like that's a positive thing is that today you have this knowledge online. You need to sort it out, right? The good and the bad, but there is a ton of free resource. Um, and aside from that, also like I feel the the cloud. I mean, the access to have side project on that is way easier,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I actually tried back then. So like when it was my first project, I rent like a server online on a data center. Like it was a small server for 1 year, like 400 euro, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And I tried to just do container, which was really early back then, like to just put a cluster on a single machine, just to have like an experiment place where I can work. And like that was like so much struggle. I remember like looking on GitHub to see how can I put like such a cluster on one machine to experiment with Hadoop, Spark, and so on. Nowadays, like this thing is super easy to do. You can put like your own budget, and maybe you don't even know to put like those kind of thing. You can just play with the free tier of BigQuery, for example, is insane, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Before reaching out, so like that's the thing positive. I would say like the market condition is harder, but the opportunity for you out there are definitely bigger than it was before. So yeah, you need to upskills yourself and try to play with the tools and get to know the market. Then you have like a lot of, I would say, interview tips and so on. I think also we are way more open about like interview process than we were before.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit more standard. I don't feel like you should expect that much surprise. So focusing on on SQL will get you really, really far,
Yeah.
way more far than before, I guess. That's and yeah, like pick a first line programming language. I mean, Python is like the de facto, and play with the data cloud components to through a project. I think it's really important to stay motivated and have a project around it. That would be my high level tip.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you brought up. It's like it's so much easier today because only not in terms of getting hired, but in terms of like setting things up. Because yeah, you could spend like a week trying to spin up like a Hadoop cluster or something like that. Like you said, you had to like go out and rent server space, which is far farther than anything I would have done. I was like, can I run it on my computer? Like I'm not gonna try. I'm not gonna go spend $500 on some space, but yeah, now it's like click, you've got, a whole cluster set up, even when you talk about Hadoop, right? Like you can use something on AWS. I mean, when the multiple managed services out there, and it just makes it so much easier. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to think that way, where it's like, yeah, do you want to use a free tier of Snowflake or BigQuery or Databricks? They exist, or you can get a very, very cheap, $10 version probably. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's always a way you can actually start
But just
projects.
that, like free tier, like
Yeah,
if you think back there, that sounds insane, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's like what? You can actually use cloud resource for free? Yeah.
yeah. So you brought up SQL. Is there any other skills you kind of generally recommend people learn to kind of become a data engineer?
Yeah, I think like SQL is a baseline, but what we kind of miss, I feel like people that I mean have a good understanding on the role that are there to know where you want to position yourself. Because if we are talking about fresh grads, right? They heard about data scientists, data engineer, maybe analytics engineer, right? But I think like it's good to get like some grasp of it and look at the job offer also. um because if you understand like those role, you know, like from end to end, what's the flow basically of like a data product, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's important, and then you will understand like how to position yourself to stand out. So like I would say, like, you asked me for a data engineer, but I would say like if you want to be a good data scientist and you know like the basics of CI and Docker container, you get like a leverage, because that's like a weakest thing. Usually it's not asked, but when things need to go into production for a data scientist, if you're comfortable with those things, then yeah, it's a good thing. So same for data engineer. I feel like everything related to infrastructure, like infrastructure as a code, container, and all the life cycle for to put something in production. So CI, automated testing. There's a lot of things actually from to be taken from software engineering in general, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like this, if you master this, yeah, I guess you will stand out, because people will not just look, oh, this guy knows SQL and has analytics mindset. No, he has strong foundation and understand how a data product works and how software in general works. So yeah, get a good level, a grasp of the different roles, and don't forget the basics of software engineering, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's always good. Building basics, whether it's in software engineering, data engineering, those are definitely going to get you pretty far. Because there's going to be, like we referenced earlier, there are tools that come and go. um, this year it's Snowflake. 5 years from now, 6 years from now, it's something completely different that we can't even tell you what it's going to be. So it's always good just to have good basics, and then everything else you'll
I
just
have a
build on top.
question for you, Ben, as data engineer to data engineer. Do
Okay.
you consider a data engineer a software engineer?
I think I've always explained it in terms of the fact that like there's a spectrum, right? And now with analytics engineer having a title, maybe it kind of separates things out a little more. Um, because one, there's like software engineer, comma data, right? Like that's usually a role that I've seen, which is usually like a data infrastructure
Is it, I
role.
think, Facebook, which is, or Google, which is using that? I think it's Google,
I,
right?
I think I think I've seen a few companies use it. I think
Yeah,
I've seen Lyft use it, and so that role tends to be like a data infrastructure role, focus, or like a software engineering role focused around data infrastructure. So you're like
yeah,
managing, like at Facebook we have Data Swarm, which is basically a data infrastructure component, and you have software engineers that manage the actual underlying infrastructure. So there's that level of kind of data engineer, but that's more of like building infrastructure. And I think there's some people who like go into data engineering thinking that's what it is. Like I'm gonna like build the next Trino, but that's more of a like pure software
yeah,
engineering role.
yeah,
I then think that there's like data engineers that are very like low level, like that are coding a lot. They're doing some maybe SQL, but they're spending a lot more time, whatever. Doing pure coding, whether that's because they're parsing logs or they're writing producers and consumers or what have you. And then like you keep going on that spectrum, and you eventually come into this basically scheduled SQL level of data engineer. And then that's where it's kind of like now with the title of like analytics engineer has kind of like maybe shifted into having its own role. But like that's how I've usually kind of described it, is like there are some that are like maybe more purely a software engineer,
software,
but
yeah,
I think there's also some that like kind of come off with this like I mostly do SQL as scheduled rate, but I also think about data models and how to like actually engineer the data and not just make it a business logic layer, but I actually do
yeah,
like core data layer. So and you kind of need all of them, because there are some people who really like to get like they want to do DevOps and code and like but they want the title of data engineer, and that's one side, and then there's the other side that are like they're kind of okay at interfacing with people, but they're also like still coding, writing SQL, and things of that nature. So that's kind of my thoughts there.
yeah. No, I totally agree. I have actually a video about that, about the different data engineers coming. And I feel like we need a bit more literacy on that, because it is so confusing. I believe like if you look at the data engineer jobs right now on LinkedIn, I'm sure like with just data engineer, you can look up with two completely different role with what you just like, for example, described, because
Yeah.
people over abuse, and I think like the title has been there for quite a while, and but the scope has been like exploding. It's like we
Yeah.
put everything in it, so we'll just see. And yeah, I think it's like it's fantastic, like the job, kind of job that's been doing DBT with bringing like this analytic engineer term and spreading the word, because yeah, I think it's welcome. It's difficult to actually put new role name, right, when you have such a big community,
Yeah.
but I think it's much needed.
Yeah, no, I think it's playing a pretty good role. At least it's helping us define, what's kind of next. Um, Speaking of next, like in your data career, how have you like grown? Like how do you recommend people kind of like grow from like whatever junior data engineer to like that next level?
Yeah. um yeah, I would say like have always in mind the business impact, and I feel like challenging stakeholder in a respectful way, it's really important skills. And again, I think we are coming back to understanding like the role and the um, um, end-to-end thing. Yeah, so like a concrete example, you've been asking for a report, right? So maybe it's not you that's going to create that dashboard, right? You're just going to provide the data for that dashboard. um, but rather than just going there and start coding and like pull the data and do the pipeline, like ask like, okay, what's the use case, what are you gonna do with it, even if like for your end of the mission, right, is providing the data for that dashboard to be built. Nothing prevents you to understand like, okay, there gonna be a data analyst that's gonna pick up that data and build such a dashboard with such a KPI, and such a KPI is going to be used by the business to do those kind of decision. So I believe like if you get that grasp of like hand to end, like this is where you're going to have an impact, because it's really hard. I feel like as a data engineer, we have so much stakeholder, right?
Yeah.
And if you have this like step back mindset, then you're gonna find, at least for me, I always find like space to improve. Like, oh, I actually don't know how that dashboarding tool works. Let me play a bit with it. Like maybe let me do a small project in the context also of my work, right? Let me. So a really easy project example is monitoring your job cost or your data pipeline. Maybe you can build a dashboard around that, right? It's like everything related to FinOps, right?
Yeah.
So you need an analytical mindset, and you need to be able to make a decision. This job is too expensive. I need to refactor or whatsoever. Or this user is doing crazy SQL. You need to contact
It's
him.
a machine learning engineer, I promise you. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so like this is like for me, like it's a really great example of project FinOps. And it's gonna grasp again the things like, okay, I need to make a decision for something, so this is how I'm gonna build my data pipeline. I don't need the frequency to be every hour, daily is enough, or even weekly. So yeah, challenging like those information, those requests that you have been receiving, just to understand how your work will add value to the business. I think that will make you grow, because if you understand that, and you're going to be able to see, oh, there is an opportunity for me to have a huge business value, because at the end, like everything that we are doing is to provide business value, right? And our job is deeply technical, so we tend sometimes to forget about that. It's really fun to over engineering stuff, to dive into new technology, right, to migration for the sake of migration. But yeah, I feel like having this business mindset within your role will help you grow and see where you have some technical weaknesses that you need to fill in order to deliver those business value.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we've gone away from a situation, I think, again, where Hadoop or something similar required so much just time just to manage, right? Like it was like, okay, just managing this is a 3-person job, right? Like if you're talking about at a large organization, probably more, but it's a team's job just to manage your cluster because things are going to go down. There's hardware involved, and as well as the software layer. So it's like, and now it's like, okay, what if we took all that away and you could just focus on the data? It's like, what do I do now? It's like you said, try to drive some sort of business value, which I think is always like arguably almost, it's not harder. It's just, I think, more ambiguous, which kind of makes it harder. It's like, what does that mean? Like, and that honestly goes perfectly to the next question. And it's like how have you seen like companies kind of drive value with data?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, and I think like anyone that's been doing like data projects since quite a while had a lot of failure more than successful project, because the reality is like if we have like so much tooling and still popping up, right, is that people are still figuring out the best way to take advantage of that data, right? Otherwise, if that technical problem were solved, like everything will be fine. So the way that I saw company getting value from data was mostly through some specific project. And I was at a certain point, I was in a big corporate, and we were kind of like an end-to-end team, bootstrapping project. So like really quick proof of concept to see, can we do anything with this data, right?
Yeah.
Before saying, okay, we're gonna do this magical machine learning based on this data, and it's gonna be fine. But rather, the other way approach was like, okay, let's talk to the business, let's see what data we have, and let's see if there is a potential project. But so I feel like you need to fail fast in those contexts.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I've been like mostly in insurance and fintech, and over there is actually a lot of like, I would say, admin work to be automated. Support tickets, mail tickets, also classic marketing funnel to be optimized, right, to a selling funnel online. So I think like that's like classic use case. Not really sexy, but I mean it works, right? I think like it's also valuable to understand like how those works today, because it's I mean, today if you build like a web app or a mobile app and you don't have this mindset of data driven, I think you're going to be dead. Yeah, there is a lot of tools to drive your feature decision, right? So I think like it's interesting to know that. But like if I look at the future and you see how those model is like sort of deep learning pre-trained model like Daily and GPT-3 are performing, we are going to definitely see much more, I would say, sexy use case ahead, right? But for me, it's like we're not there yet. So I feel like classic, marketing, funnel, automating administration task for decision maker. I think it's classic. And again, I talk about FinOps. I think FinOps for our role is going to grow because now everything is in the cloud, right? Before it was way much harder to optimize the costs because I'm going to run a big job on this cluster and just block everybody, right? That was the situation. But now it's, I'm going to run that big job and my credit card is just going to burn, and that's fine. so I think like, there is a lot to do over there in terms of FinOps to really optimize your costs and do prediction according to your growth. And that's will, I think, fall into everybody's laps, right? But it will fall, a big part will fall on data engineering responsibility, because I believe infrastructure cost for data can be super expensive, right? In terms of, we say that S3 is cheap. Yeah, it's cheap if you have like a good strategy, But if you have like versioning, backup, and so on, you start to I mean, it's go pretty quickly if you don't look at the cost and how you manage those.
Yeah, it almost to me feels like you're redefining a DBA. It's like, okay, we're not gonna have DBAs anymore, but we still need someone to manage what's going on in the database. Just costs. It's like, so it's like a financial DBA. No, okay. It's just like, so are we redefining it? But yeah, I think that's the other way I've usually, I think, explained it is, DBAs, I think at some point, like there's a lot of what they did, but one thing they did was like just manage like, like how many bits and bytes went into a column, because that your server only has so much space. And, if you're, getting 1 million new users a year, you're going to run out of server space. You can almost predict it. In the same way, now it's like we don't care about bits and bytes, we care about terabytes, that you're running. And it's like, okay, why is this query running every 3 minutes, and it's burning through hundreds of credits, and suddenly my Snowflake bill is crazy, or my S3 bill is crazy. And yeah, I do think that's kind of where we're going, where it's like, yeah, how do we manage this chaos? I think that's why, like, in a weird way, we almost always kind of stay in the same position to some degree as like data engineers, or whatever you want to, like, label us, is like we always create a new problem. It's like, okay, we fixed all of these problems, now we have this new problem that needs to be managed. And like every time we get like the new problem managed, it's like, okay, now that's caused this other problem. So it's just this like constant tearing up. It's like, okay, what's the problem now? So
Okay. So let's define a new role name for that one, right? Like the data engineer FinOps, and like let's
oh man.
just give all FinOps problem to that guy, right?
Yeah, that's basically what's going to happen. You're going to have a new role, and their whole job is just to manage your cost of all
Yeah.
of your data processes. And it's like
Or data finance engineer, like
something,
let's say.
something. I don't know, or just a FinOps analyst. It could just be, with some DBA tendencies. I don't know. It's just funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. I guess. Have you seen any like major failures with data? Because you brought it up. So what have you seen in terms of like failures of data projects?
Yeah, I think it's like assumption on how the data is like most of the business knows how the data flow from the input, then there is a huge black box, and then there is what they see, right? And so they assume like when they have good idea for project, that's I don't argue with that. But they tend to say, okay, I think we can do that. We have this data, I can see it, my UI, and if we could collect that and do that, then you realize that in practice it's not feasible, because this data is coming from a third provider. You don't have control over the quality over there. You don't have fully control. There is license problem, cost problem involved, that makes like the project not viable. Also, all those people involved, you all often forget, because it's always a lot of bunch of people working. But I think like, yeah, the main failure is basically assuming that your data is clean enough to do what you want it to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, it happened all the time, because actually there is no status on how, like, okay, what's my raw data look like. I think today with like data catalog, data lineage tooling that's going to pop up, this gonna reduce like the side effect of, oh, I thought so. Because then you can literally look, okay, actually this data is coming from that and that, and grasps the complexity or not of a particle or data set. But yeah, a few years back, and still nowadays, it's still really difficult when you get like that vision from a business point of view, and the dashboard and analytics from a project itself. It's even dashboard, actually. It's I work like on marketing funnel projects where we realize there was so much thing wrong. I think like I have a I have a good one. So we were tracking for a funnel, so a selling funnel on website. It was a new product, and we saw, oh, we don't get that much sales or people stopping there. And then we realized, like, I think it took me like really almost 3 weeks, 2 weeks after the launch. I did the funnel myself. I wasn't really responsible, but I realized the cookie, pop up was completely hidden. It's
Oh, no.
like I could almost not see it. And so by default, we didn't know, like, so yeah, we actually had a number from from Google Analytics too. So that's the number of visitor, but no idea if it's a unique visitor. I mean, you can take it from different things, but it's hard. But the point is, like, all the data of the dashboard that we had, like, was false to a certain extent, just because on the front end it was not so obvious that, like, there was people needed to accept that cookies so that we
Mm,
can track the different things. And so that was, and it was just a dashboard. So, and like, we know, like, okay, for the first month, basically, then we solved that with, like, feature request to front end and so on. But that, yeah, most of our data were going to be wrong for the first months. So that can be, like, quickly, even not, it's not how the data look like, it's how you present it, or it's like a question of process. And there is so much people involved in those
yeah.
projects, right? Here it's like marketing people, product owner, and then front end engineering. Yeah, that's really a lot. That it's difficult to drive, like, success.
Yeah.
I think data mesh is, like, helping on those things in terms of organization, but again, it's something that is out there since just like 1 year or two, right? It's
Yeah.
just taking off.
Yeah, it's a new idea, and with any new idea, I was just reading. I mean, this was more about code, but I was just reading a post from like Joel. I don't know how to say his last name, but I think he was like the creator of Stack Overflow, and I think he was highly involved in Netscape.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote something like the idea that new code is better than old code is patently absurd. But his point was, like, with old code, it works. Like, it's like, yeah, but it works. You understand how hard it is to get things working. And the same way with like best practices, like data mesh, I think sounds good, but we're gonna find probably in a few years that there's a bunch of problems that maybe other models worked better at solving, because you're always going to find new problems with every new idea. So I think, in theory it sounds great, and then we're going to test it out. It might work great, but there's going to be some problem. There's always going to be something that's a problem. That's just kind of the world of technology. It's like, we fix this one, like I said, we fix this one thing, and now we cause a new problem. It's like, okay, now we don't need to manage Hadoop clusters or whatever. We have Snowflake, so you can just like spin that up where you have some sort of cloud managed service. Cool. Now your Snowflake costs or whatever are going crazy. New problem that we've created and we have to solve. It's like, okay, great. So it just pushes on. But since before we're going to do Q&A for everyone who's here. So before that, though, speaking of the future, where do you kind of see the data industry going in like 10 years?
10 years. Do you think I have a Stargate in my bedroom?
Oh, Stargate. What a nerdy reference. Jeez. Stargate Atlantis? Which one? Which season? Which show?
I wanted to see how old you are. Anyway, no, I think it's 10 years. It's really hard. If you see how the
Okay,
past 10
5
years
years.
has been
5 years.
yeah, 5
5
years.
years.
5 years. It's more reasonable. Yeah, I think, like, so the general trends that we see is that we just discussed it, right? If you look at on-premise cluster, it was a whole team, right? And now we don't need that team anymore. We have other problem for sure, but definitely we need less resource to manage certain things. It means that, like, doing data pipeline getting more democratized, like to do like a big data pipeline today. If you use just the cloud data warehouse, you just need to know SQL, right? And you can do it.
Yeah.
Before you had like an entire team to set up the big data cluster and so on. So with that in mind, I can see, in the same sense that, like, everybody knows how to use a smartphone, right? At least most of the people, maybe not the older. there will be way more people that know how to do data engineering. So I don't feel like, I feel we're gonna have like specific role. It's gonna be more niche. But I feel like some of our responsibility today will be just handled by common tech people. Can be a
Yeah.
product owner, software engineer, depending on the use case, right? So I can see more tools to help that democratization happening. So it's already popping up on machine learning and so on. I think like Hugging Face, for example, on the
Mm.
machine learning side, is doing a great job with their hub. Like how easy it is to use pre-trained models, deploying them, and so on. And I think for data engineering, it's the same. I think there is a lot of things that we do today we won't do, and we will more focus on the, I think, the business impacts using higher frameworks. So that's like, yeah, that's my hot take. I feel like you still need, like, of course, to be deep technical on certain things, but I think like in general you will more need a breadth knowledge than a depth knowledge, I
Yeah.
would say, as a data engineer. So like know how tooling is working, how they fit together, how relevant they are, to do basically your project.
Yeah, I think that's usually the eventual skill you have to pick up, which is like end to end thinking, and understanding at least how the tools are abstracting and what's best practices. I always use the example of when I first started in the tech world, BI developer as well, and I started with Tableau, and I built some dashboards, and I clicked refresh whenever, like basically said to refresh whenever anyone looked at it, which within a few weeks someone came down and was like, do you understand what you're running here? You're like making this run against the database every time. I was like, oh, I just figured people always want like live data. Doesn't that make sense? Like, okay. So, I think those little things are where you pick up through just doing things, because it's hard to know every thing you're doing in the system, but starting to think through that, like it's so easy, it's dangerous, is kind of the world we're in, right? Like it's so easy to make a DBT model that it's
Yeah.
dangerous because now it's in production, and did anyone test that data? Did anyone test whatever? How is it running? Is it most optimal? Things like that. So yeah, I think it's great that we're making it more accessible. I think on the next side, it's like the next thing is education for people who can access it. Like, how do we use it in such a way that is optimal and isn't like blowing through credits, or just putting data, like making data insecure, right? Like it's like, oh, I built this view and it's not translating, like security is on the table, it's not on the view, and now someone can answer, like access some PII or something. It's like, oops,
Yeah.
little things like that I think is
Yeah, no,
the harder part.
education for, like, I mean, all the data citizen is like, yeah, a key component, I believe. But what I'm also really surprised is, like, I don't know if you noticed, like this past year, all the regular apps that we are using, it can be, I mean, social network. I mean, LinkedIn stats is not so great, but there, a lot of them have analytic tab,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And like even like Spotify, you can like get not with the API, like just information. And Spotify, they've been doing like every year this
yeah, yeah, yeah,
analytics shape, and this is crazy because like they have this data since years, right? But
yeah,
now they're providing it to consumer, and consumer probably expecting that. So it's a completely different mindset to like, okay, I would say a regular person is used to consume data
yeah,
on their banking app to say, oh, this is how much I spend. This is like my target budget
yeah,
based on prediction. Like everybody start to understand the usage of this data on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, I feel that that's really great because I feel like, before I was the only nerd doing that for my job for someone, right? And now it started, yeah, to be more democratized also on the consumption, not just on doing the pipeline and so on. So yeah,
yeah,
I think that's like that's going into a nice direction.
yeah. I think like I love the YouTube analytics, like just what they provide. But just so we can start going to Q&A, I'm going to start putting up. There's a few questions that have kind of shown up, so I'm just going to start here. first, which is how important. Oh, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there.
Your webcam has decided to turn off.
Yes.
And
She's lazy. Let me restart. No worries. She had a long day already. It's not like you.
Does she have a name? Did you name your webcam?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Anyways, how important is Linux to these roles, which I assume is like data engineering, data science, etc.?
Yeah. Yeah, I believe, I mean, that's a good question. I believe I got into Linux like because I had to connect to server. So I feel like again it's big. It's depending on the data engineering scope, right? If you work more as an analytics engineer, I'm not sure if it's that much relevant. I mean, it's of course it's always good to know, right? But we have so much to learn, right? So my question is that really mandatory for me to know? And I would say the most beautiful answer, it depends on the role. I would say as a data engineer in general, I think you need to know the basic how to navigate to a Linux file system, create folder, use a bit Vim and so on, like really all the basic access management. And I think like there is a great course on like learn the basics. And I think that's it. You don't need to go further than that because I mean it will be triggered your needs on the job basically.
Yeah. I mean, and what's nice there is, again, going back to your reference earlier about spinning up your own Hadoop cluster. It's like when I started, which wasn't even that long ago, it's like you'd have to like, you have to spin it up yourself. You have to be like, okay, set up a VM, do this, do that.
Yeah.
Now it's like just spin up an EC2 instance, like just connect to that, figure out how to do that, figure out how to SSH into it. And that's honestly what you're going to be mostly doing anyways in most cases, right? Like you're going to most likely be SSHing into something and using it from there. So I think just knowing those basic, like I said, those basic skills, moving around in the folder structure, things like that. Maybe eventually you start getting a little more like understanding of kind of what's going on, but for the most part, it's like as long as you know how to work through it, run a few things. Usually that's enough. Let's see for this next question. If I am a data science intern, what else should I do to gain data engineering skills, given the fact I'm good with DevOps and MLOps?
Yeah, I feel like, okay, DevOps, I think like everything related, I mean, it depends what you include in DevOps. But I would say, so I would include it CI, CI/CD. So I think you need to be really comfortable with that. And yeah, best practice on coding, testing, like grasp the knowledge on what's like an unit test, integration test, end-to-end tests, infrastructure as a code, Terraform, Pulumi. So this is like kind of framework you can grasp. But yeah, I think if you have like I actually said it like earlier during this talk. If you are a data scientist and you're pretty comfortable with DevOps thing, then you get you can go already pretty far. Probably SQL. I think any data scientist is pretty comfortable with SQL. That's their first interface usually to get the data. So yeah, don't have that much actually. What about you, Ben?
I was actually gonna poke at SQL because I've generally noticed that, at least maybe, and it probably depends on maybe the country or program, but SQL always seems to be like an afterthought for a lot of programs. Like whenever I seem to talk to data scientists, they'll usually reference things in data processing and data frames and not in SQL, which I've always found very interesting. There's a whole discussion there. Even
I know which article you are talking about.
Oh, I don't. There's an article. No, I just
yeah,
know,
there is an article about SQL versus data frame.
Okay,
for sure.
you have to send it to me at some point, because I mean I know, like, I am very aware of like I don't know if it's not like animosity, but there's like definitely people who are like very like, I think data frames is best, and then there's people who are like, I think SQL is best. And I'm always just like, I mean, I learned SQL. I guess I'm old because it's like, but I do think it's data, like on the data scientist side, it's almost the opposite, where it's like maybe it's like 60% data frames, 40% SQL. Like, and like
Mhm.
who likes what, and then you flip that for data engineers who are like mostly SQL, and then data frames for some things. So I just find that funny. But yeah, I mean, like it does depend on your, like if your SQL skills aren't great, I'd always say like that's almost number one, because almost every interview I know of for data scientists will have at least one SQL round. So that's where I feel.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one I'm just curious in terms of what your thoughts are. So basically, will Databricks workflows be used widely as an orchestrator like Airflow now is? What are your thoughts there in terms of like Databricks and kind of where it's going in the future?
And all the workflow thingy.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think the question is, I think we should ask more the question that is Airflow um, gonna be the only option and remain the standard de facto for orchestrator in the next year or so? I would say no.
Yeah.
I would say it's still pretty strong due to the initial community, and because I feel like it was kind of the first, right? It was just fighting against Luigi back then, which died. But um, but so yeah, I feel like I haven't put my hands on it. It's pretty new, right? I think it's just been announced.
Yeah.
Uh, but I do believe that if you are a Databricks user, I mean within your company, it does make sense to try it out and try to leverage. I always have kind of a rule of thumb to say don't use any cloud product that is less than 1 year old,
That's
at least in production, because you will suffer from the early bugs.
yeah.
But I do believe that we need to think a bit more in terms of like I feel like it makes completely sense to have different orchestration option, um, and um, and so maybe Databricks workflow will be like the option to go if you are a Databricks user. I'm not sure if you're outside, it's a bit more complicated, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think even like so, one thing like I've noticed, because usually what I'll tell people to do is if they're going to do Airflow, use a managed version, because it just becomes too, like, unless you have it, like, again, it comes to that you're going to have a person who manages it otherwise if you're setting it up from scratch. But even then, I think using like Cloud Composer on average, it's like $10 a day. And that's with nothing running. Like you could have nothing running, it's going to cost you $10 a day, because you've got Kubernetes, you've got cloud compute, all of that. So I think one reason I've like some things that are like Databricks workflow or even Google Cloud workflows, anything that's like almost a serverless function essentially that you can kind of set in steps, so like Lambda like step functions or something. If your jobs are simple enough, I'd say use that, just because it's going to be so much cheaper for your company.
Mm.
But if you have more
And
complex tags, it's
and again,
understandable.
$10 a month.
A
We need to
day, a
ask ourselves.
day.
Yeah, a day. Sorry. Yeah, I wanted to say, is that like a big deal at the end of the month
Yes,
for a company? Like it depends, right? And a lot of company would say no compared to the whole TCO of their data platform.
for sure.
But I think it should be big deal on the cloud era that we are,
Yeah,
right? If you think about like how much things you can do with $10 on the cloud today, then you would say, okay, maybe it's not worth it to pay a cluster, just like
yeah,
that I'm not using,
and
or
that's
1 hour a day, basically. Yeah,
and that's pretty small. Just be like that. That's like almost like the smallest I think you
yeah, the
can get.
smallest.
So if you like have like 20 schedulers and like have some crazy setup or something, or multiple instances of Cloud Composer, it probably gets even crazier. But yeah, I mean, obviously $10 a day doesn't seem like much, but for a company that's maybe small, and then it goes up to like eventually 1,000 or 2,000, it's like that can be a lot. But yes, obviously plenty of companies, it's like that's just normal operations. That's fine. All right, let's see. I'm just trying to think. No, not that question. Just to do. Oh, here. I think because I feel like you've got a few thoughts here. Since the data platform part of things is progressing to lesser and lesser code intensive, do you think data engineering is collapsing inwards to just become ETL?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think like there is like definitely more tools, and I believe like my job has been more like I'm putting stacks together
Yeah.
than building them. So like if we talk about like ingestion, you can grab Arbite, do a couple of things, then DBT, and you put them together. But so again, I feel like no, based on like my previous answer regarding where we are heading towards, I think we're gonna have more business mind focus. So I feel like your work will be more end to end than like the ETL part will be one thing, but it's also a bit more to know, okay, which tool I'm gonna using to do that kind of pipeline, and not the pipeline itself, not the pipeline complexity itself. But it's true that it will definitely be lesser code intensive. I feel it's a good opportunity, if I put it that way, to jump on other things if you like coding.
Yeah.
I don't know, backend, like pure backend or front end. I mean, I like to do those in my side projects, especially because sometimes, yeah, the thing is that the whole project can be complex, but like every single bit is actually pretty simple. Um, so so yeah, more. I don't think we'll do really just ETL. It's a much more broader. Um, but yeah, it's difficult. Maybe we're gonna have like just ETL, pure ETL developer. I don't know,
Yeah.
that will stack those tools together. That's a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've oddly become, like, in some cases, depending on the company, we've become more of like solution, maybe not architect, because that refers to almost like a lack of doing anything and you're just planning, but
Yeah,
like just putting things together. And there's still a ton of value there, and in arguably more. You just have to be one person. Also, I want to be mindful of time. Like usually things go about 10-15 minutes over, but if you need to leave at in 2 minutes, let me know. Otherwise, I
it's
can
fine.
I
I'm
can keep.
having fun.
It's really dangerous because like the first time I did this, I think I was on here for like 2.5 hours, and then I realized I was like, oh my god, I've been like answering questions for so. Oh man. Okay, I want to bring up this other question since it's kind of in a similar vein, which is the all the tools kind of world. So, with all the different tools and technologies used for various things in data engineering, any tips to managing growing complexity of these symptoms? Is there anything on the horizon to help?
No, we are all being doomed. That's a good question. I think we need to have a bit more boundary. We have a lot of interoperability between the tools. I mean, more. That's great. I mean, if I just take like the data format standard, Parquet or Iceberg, uh, Delta Lake, so not going into that, David, but I think it's the interoperability between tools are getting better. So that's at least one thing, because if we look back, it was a lot of proprietary tool. So if you
No.
use that, it's like almost impossible to get out. Now we just talked like you have multiple orchestration tool, right? One team is using AWS step function. It's super easy to spawn, right? It's just like a couple of line in Terraform, has no expense, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you have already an Airflow setup managed by a team or self-managed, half-managed, whatever service they provide. So should you be okay with that? And so I think it's more in terms of discussion and the organization within your company to raise that awareness, to not go sideways with like tech radar and so on. Oh, you are using step function, let's assess that and let's approve that. because the more tool you're gonna have, the less experience and expertise you're gonna be able to build, right? So I think it's a trade-off to do that. I think it's more at the organization level to have such place like data guilds or architecture forum. When you bring that up and raise the awareness, oh, we already have, two orchestration tool in house. So if you want a third one, we need to kick off one. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just saying something, but I think like this is kind of decision that needs to be and discussion that needs to happen. Same for even for data warehouse, because yeah, you have so much option in the cloud today, and it's so easy to launch them up. So if you don't put the organization to put those boundaries, the things can go sideways. Um, but aside from that, I'm not sure if we have like any practical tip within the data engineering scope um, to solve that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up like it's just so easy because you think about it prior. In order to like spin up a data warehouse, you have to go talk to IT, who would have processes in place to say no. Nowadays, it's like you have a credit card, spin one up. like,
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
can literally just
exactly.
have
Yeah.
them being built without you, like without your company knowing. Essentially, like there's no need to even like set up an initiative. You can just be like, oh yeah, I mean like it's only like $50 a month or $200 a month. Like okay, we got it spinning up and we're just doing it ourselves. So you can totally go around IT's back and just start doing things, which is probably not great, but that's just funny. Yeah. All right. Let's see. So many questions. There's a lot of people, so I think there's a few people, and I always get a few of these, like, how do you get started when you're just beginning? And we kind of at least touched on this a little bit. And there's two questions I'd say that are kind of like this, like becoming a junior data engineer. But I guess let's just do a quick recap. Like how would you, I feel like, get started if just coming out of college in the data engineering world?
So if I assume you have like, if you have a CS, a computer science background, then I would say pick a project that you sounds interesting. Like it needs to be exciting. At least unless you're like a lead code hardcore programmer, but I found it boring. But like find a project. I like project based approach because you will grasp the thing hand to end and you will touch on things that fall a bit outside of the data engineering scope, but that makes you understand like how things works together, and you're gonna be able to discuss and understand those things during the interview. So yeah, pick a project, a side project, set up your AWS account or GCP account. I mean, pick one cloud provider. Don't need to be uh, YOLO on both of them at the same times. Put the monitoring on your credit cards, right? Because otherwise, this can burn quickly. And pick and play with those tools, like classic data tools. So if you're on AWS, play with S3, play with AWS Glue, maybe spawn a little Redshift for sometimes and play around it. So yeah, fix your budget, play for a single project, and understand how things works end to end. I think that's the best way to grasp certain things. And then maybe if you don't have ID or you don't find, but there is a couple of things online to find like good project, you can dive on specific technical topic on Spark, I would say. But yeah, again, SQL is like the first things to entry, and then programming language like Python in infrastructure as a code. Like yeah, that's I would say already good things in your tool belt.
Yeah, exactly. I think you've kind of hit it on the head. I usually always tell people it's like a pyramid. Do your SQL, your Python, learn data warehousing and data pipelining, even if it's just to understand where it came from, and then some cloud, and that's usually a solid enough base to get hired. And yeah, build a project, like do something with all that, and don't just follow a tutorial. Go find something. Go like try creating something. Like I like the project that the person did where he was like tracking all the airplanes and like just scraped all that up so he could like post to Twitter, where Elon Musk's jet was. I don't know if you saw that project, but like it's not necessarily a data engineering project, but it kind of like it. You're interacting with an API, you're scraping it, put it into a database, do a quick little where clause, find Elon Musk's jet code, and then create another API connection to post to Twitter, and have that on a normal interval. You could do that all with cloud functions, basically, like
Yeah,
and
it's
something
insane.
database.
Yeah.
So just even something like that guy got in the news. I'm sure he had job offers afterwards, even though it was probably a very simple project, honestly. So yeah. Now let's remove these questions. Oh well, this is interesting only in terms of like building a data warehouse locally. I guess which local database do you still like and use?
I think Postgres is definitely like my way to go. But to be honest, I don't believe like in, in local. I think I read like an article on recently. Local host is dead, um, and it's more on developer setup. I've done a video about that with like how to use reproducible development setup and GitHub code space. And I do believe we go into that way where most of the compute, even for development setup, will happen right into the cloud.
Yeah.
So I would say don't do it. I mean, like a free I mean, BigQuery has a free tier, which is just insane. So you can play with that a lot. You have access to a lot of integration out of the box. So yeah, you shouldn't struggle. I think what's interesting also is that if you pick like a cloud data warehouse, you also will ask yourself, how do I test things out? Right now that I cannot run Snowflake really locally, right? It's not the purpose of it, neither BigQuery. So how do I test my SQL, my pipeline, my test, and make the pricing as low as possible? Like that's the challenge today that we have as we use a lot of cloud resource, is all those integration tests and end-to-end tests. Where before, as you mentioned, like if you have a local database like a Postgres, you can like bootstrap everything locally and then run within the CI, a simple thing. Nor is a bit more challenging, but it's doable. But that's like definitely skill set that will bring you far when you are on the job.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree on that. I mean, I get the desire to spin things up locally, but at the same time, it's like the question becomes why, unless you're like planning to do something maybe like because you're trying to figure out how to spin things up locally via Docker or something.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's like, yeah, why not just do it in the cloud? That's where everything's going to be mostly anyways. Or even if it's not in the cloud, that it's going to essentially be in the cloud for you whenever you work in production, right? Like there's not
Yes.
a local instance of Postgres at a company. It's always going to be something you're connecting to. So it's more realistic in that way anyways. So
Yeah, and unless your room is pretty cold, sometimes it can, start up the fence like hell.
yeah.
I'm not going to talk about like how painful sometimes it is to run Airflow locally, even on Docker. I mean, I think like now with the M1 machine, like on MacBook, it's okay, but it's like that's expensive machines. I mean, I think for tech companies, like it's norm, but no, I would say if you can bootstrap something on the cloud, it's relatively cheap and it's faster and it won't like sweat your local computer. Just do it.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Okay, so kind of again more intro-y question, but do you think it's fair for companies to assess kind of the DS&A skills of data engineers and data scientists?
My question is it fair to have DSA interviews in conservative big tech company? No.
Yeah.
No, I think like yeah, for me it's a wider debate because I'm not a fan of such interview process. But again, it's I think from the big tech company is it's hard to evaluate in an objective way when you have so much application, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have any thing, but like to still give an answer on data engineering, data science, again, I feel like we need to. I like to see the data engineer as just an expert of software engineering,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like for data scientists, I think also it helps because like a lot of data scientists have their workflow in notebooks. There is frameworks to put things in production and so on. And I have a love and hate things with notebook, but just to take that example is that if a data scientist has more software engineering baseline approach, then it makes the things easier to communicate with other people that maybe gonna take, oh, but I know it's a notebook, but I have the setup and this is how I can deploy it. It has like a bit of DevOps. Um, so in that sense, if we consider that data engineering and data scientists are actually software engineering with just a specialization, then it's fair to have
Yeah.
DSA interview in big tech company. I don't see how they could do other way. But to talk about my personal experience, I mostly worked this past year in hyper growth company and tech company like Klarna and others. And those companies are usually have more time to do review, take home tests. They can afford to do so. So some of them will not give you the essay or little to know because they're more like practical to what they need. They're not that big and they don't receive that much application. They receive a lot, right? But they can still afford to do so. Maybe not Klarna anymore, but I mean, you get the point. Like, if you have a company which is an empire growth, like above like 500 people, 400 people, so it's not a startup like a small startup anymore. At least for me, I like to work in those kind of environments, and I feel like the interview process is way more fair than in big tech company. Yeah, so I would say that's a tip. You can also change your target company.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's generally always it's always a little bit silly when a company that maybe doesn't, yeah, it's like, why are you asking me these questions? Like, for a company that maybe one is not going to offer me a salary that is equivalent to a big tech company. It's like, why are you, and not offer the clout. It's like, why are you making me go through these hoops, right? And some of them do like even longer interviews, like in terms of like number, right? Like at least with big tech, it's usually pretty consistent, right? Like one screening interview, well, generally one recruiting screening interview just to make sure you're a normal person. One screening interview that's just like, you know, if it's data engineering, some baseline Python questions, some baseline SQL questions, and then like one all day interview process where you have like 5 rounds, and it's always pretty consistent. Whereas like I've heard horror stories of like other companies that aren't tech companies, and you'll do like an extra full day interview after that too, just because whatever, and you're just like, what? Like, you're not even paying, you're paying half as much as a big tech company, and you're making me go through twice as much work just to get
Yeah,
hired. So, my joke or my thought always is that, like, I think the reason big tech companies do all the layers and make it so difficult is so we don't want to do it again, and we'll just stay with them. We just won't quit. We're just like, oh, that was just too much work. We'll just stay with you. We don't want to do interviews again. But yeah, that's kind of, I think, how most of us feel. It's like, if you're big tech, we'll put up with it. If you're not, maybe not. But I know that's not all of our choices. Okay, we're getting close here on time, so we can kind of just wrap this question, which I get every time. I get every time on my videos, and I get every time like on my comments to videos, and I get every live. But let's see if you give a different answer. So AWS, Azure, or GCP, which cloud is best to study or focus on?
the answer is so I did actually a website. I'll put it
Please, yeah. If you
in the
can't,
chat.
if you can't, I'll put it in.
Yeah, sure. It's still scrapping, and I'm gonna do a video about it soonish. But bottom line is that I scrapped for about more than a year data jobs, and there is a lot. There is other. Let me just find the chat. There is other article that will tell you actually what the market wants. So it depends. Like I feel like you should, if you want, like if your goal is to get hired, right? Then just look at the job offer, and most of them would say that I think it's AWS is still. So yeah, here is the link. It's a really damn stupid data studio dashboard, and you can see like how much actually job offer there is depending on the role and the location on AWS is your GCP. But mostly, I think AWS is still dominant in the tech industry. At
Yeah.
least I think in the old corporate, they had like Microsoft was already heavily there, right? So they just do an appendix to have the cloud stuff, and that's it. Uh, but, and GCP is still fighting. I think it has great product, but AWS I think is definitely a good start if you want to get hired. Um, for me, it's like I always compare that I don't have I don't have almost no knowledge about Azure, so I cannot talk about it. But AWS is more technical,
Mhm.
and GCP is just like more high level, just to make it works. Google designed the things differently. But so I believe like if you are used to AWS, it's going to be easier for you to jump on GCP than the other way around. Um, and also, whatever clouds you are picking, understand the technology which is behind and what it's doing. All
Yeah.
right, because they all have fancy name, Pokemon name, right? But understanding like, okay, what is it actually behind?
Yeah.
Um, what's Redshift? What's the equivalent? There is a tons of cheat sheet that give you the equivalent of a cloud service to another cloud provider, right?
Yeah.
And to 70-80%, that's they do the same thing, right? They
Yeah.
have different features, but if you have that in mind, it's really great. Like understanding like in data specifically how what is AWS Athena, and like behind is actually Trino, right, which was actually Presto before, and what it's doing, and what's the equivalent on BigQuery if there is any. So like those kind of things will help you to understand the cloud context without actually touching it. But yeah, AWS definitely I think is the way to go if you want to get it.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And you gave a slightly different answer. I usually am just like, well, I mean, any of those big three work. But I'm glad you had an opinion there. So that's great.
So
Um.
52, I just look at the dashboard. So there is 160,000 data jobs over
Mm,
the past 2 years almost now. I'm mostly
mhm.
just picking. And AWS is at 52%.
Yeah. Oh, okay. There you go.
So
There's still
30% for Azure and 10% for GCP and 24% for 5% for everything else.
perfect. I mean, I think the one thing is like Azure's just done a great job because it's Microsoft and their distribution is like, oh, we're already in your system. Just switch
Yeah.
over to our thing. So they have a huge thing. All right. Well, I want to say thank you so much for jumping on, and thanks for everyone who's paid attention and listened this long. Actually, I'm going to do something. Like, if anyone wants to go stream bomb someone else who's talking about data right now, Joe from Ternary Data is doing something. Has his live this time as
Yeah,
well. I usually don't.
S3.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
I
true.
usually yeah. I usually don't do. Who else? Did you say it's a different podcast or a different talk?
No, it's this one. I had my in my agenda, so
Oh.
I'll jump right in.
So yeah, if
Cool.
people want to go stream bomb him after this one, go make him wonder why
Go, 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 go.
he suddenly has like 30 people jumping in, because I think right now he's got 9. But yeah, thank you everyone, and do you have any last words?
No, but it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and yeah, I have a lot of things coming out so on the
Perfect.
channel. So please feel free to have a look and get back to me if you have any feedback or question. I'll be happy to help.
Yep. Thank you all for watching, and I'm gonna hit and broadcast.